Hello everyone, this is Andy Vu and welcome to my channel. Today I will do some image quality and noise level comparison between Sony A1 Mark II and Sony A7R VI. I will also test the autofocus system of the A1 II and the A7R VI once again, because the subness of an image depends on how accurately the autofocus performs. The autofocus system ability to lock onto a bird's eye, head or body depends on the AI subject recognition system. In other words, the AI subject recognition detects the bird's eye and provides that precise location to the autofocus system. The autofocus system then joins the lens model to maintain perfect focus on that specific eye, head or body. Therefore, the AI itself does not move the lens or directly affect image subness. However, it's the most critical factor because it tells the autofocus system exactly where to measure the focusing distance. Instead of relying on specification, we will test both cameras in the field under challenging lighting conditions to see how they actually perform in real-world photography. We will compare image detail, noise levels, highlight handling, and overall JPEG image quality straight out of the camera. For this comparison, I will use JPEG files directly from both cameras without any editing or third-party noise reduction. This will show the actual image quality produced by each camera's sensor and in-camera image processing. Both cameras will be configured with identical settings. We will examine the image at 50% and 100% magnification to compare detail, retention, and noise performance one between the Sony A1 Mark II and the Sony A7R VI. Before taking any photos, I will show the complete setup of both cameras so you can verify that the test is as fair as possible. Both cameras will use the same setting. Shooting mode manual. Autofocus mode continuous autofocus. Subject recognition. Birds with eye, head, body recognition enabled. Focus area tracking zone. Dry mode 30 frames per second continuous shooting. Image quality JPEG extra file. Color space Adobe RGB. Creative look standard. All other settings include aperture, framing, focus point, and lighting condition will remain identical between the Sony A1 and Mark II and the Sony A7R VI. Let's go to the field. And now I am at the resort County Park to conduct a real-world test on Sony A7R VI and Sony A1 Mark II. Behind me is two islands, one facing the sun and another face away from the sun, so that's create a very good scenario for testing on the highlight, and another is on the shadow. I will start with the Sony A1 Mark II, and for the first test I will set the shutter speed to 1/1250, ISO auto, and compensation negative 2/3 stop. Now this is where the difference between these two cameras become very interesting. On both small islands, the one facing the sun and the one facing away from the sun, the Sony A7R VI consistently show a clear advantage in AI subject recognition. The A7R VI quickly detected the bird's eye and the autofocus point immediately locked onto it. The A1 II, however, told a very different story. Its AI recognition detected the bird, but it failed to recognize the eye. As a result, the autofocus point locked onto the bird's body rather than the eye. And when I look at the image at 100% magnification, the difference was obvious. The bird's eye captured by A7R VI was sharper. But here is the interesting part. When I stop looking at just the eye and compare the entire bird, the overall image quality between the A7R VI and the A1 II was similar. I also examined the noise very carefully. The A7R VI showed just a tiny bit more noise in some images, but the difference was so small in real-world photography. I would consider it negligible, and this zero was not limited to auto ISO. And now I will test with the ISO 100, 400, 800, and 1600. I repeated the test at ISO 100, 400, 800 and 1600, and the story remained essentially the same. The A7R VI continued to demonstrate a much more effective AI subject recognition system. It quickly identified the bird's eye and gave the autofocus system a precise target to lock onto. The A1 II, on the other hand, recognized the bird itself but often failed to identify the eye, leaving the autofocus point somewhere on the bird body. But when I come to image quality and noise, things get much closer. At every ISO level tested by A7R VI and A1 II produced similar results. The difference in noise were extremely small, far smaller than I expected, given the difference in resolution and specifications. And now I am testing to capture birds in flight with A1 Mark II. There was one limitation during the birds in flight test. I was standing at the edge of the pond while the eagles were flying between two small islands. From my position, the birds would fly across the frame at roughly about 25-degree angle. It was not a perfect setup, but I believe it was still good enough to give us a meaningful real-world comparison. And now I am testing to capture birds in flight with A7R VI. After all of these real-world tests, compare the A1 II and the A7R VI, shooting with the sun behind the burst, shooting direct against the sun, and photographing burst in flight. Here is what I found. For overall image quality, these two cameras are extremely close. The A7R VI does appear to have a slight advantage in detail, but honestly, this is not something you are going to see under normal viewing conditions. I could only clearly see the difference after cropping beyond 100%. The same thing happened with noise. The A7R VI produced slightly more noise than the A1 II, but differences were extremely small. I could really see it only when pushing the image to around 150% magnification. So when it comes to image quality and noise, I would call the two cameras extremely close. But autofocus is a completely different story. This is where the A7R VI clearly pulled ahead at the same shooting distance. The A7R VI were able to recognize the bird's eye while the A1 II could not. The A1 II could recognize the bird itself, but because the birds were far away, it could not identify the eye. And this is an important point when you look at the final image with your eyes, especially without heavy cropping. You may not notify much difference. Both cameras can produce a sharp-looking photograph, but once you start cropping heavily, the difference in subject recognition becomes much more important. The camera that can actually identify and focus on the bird's eye has a much better chance to put the critical detail exactly where it needs to be. So if you ask me, if I could only buy one of these two cameras, which one would I choose? My answer is the Sony A7R VI. And for me, the reasons are very simple. First, it's cost about $2,500 less than the A1 II. Second, A7R VI has about 33% more megapixels than the A1 II. That gives me more pixels to work with, more flexibility when cropping, and more detail for landscape photography. Third, its image quality is at least compared to the A1 II. I'm not even saying that it's better. I'm saying that based on my real-world testing, it is at least on the same level. 4. Its noise performance is still very good. Yes, the A1 II has a slightly advantage, but the difference is so small. In my opinion, it simply does not justify the enormous price difference. Fifth, the A7R VI uses a higher capacity battery, so I can shoot more images before having to train or recharge the battery. And perhaps most important, many of the features that I actually care about are available on both cameras. Speed boost, pre-capture, high-speed continuous shooting, and 120 frames per second slow motion. So, what am I really giving up by choosing the A7R VI? Based on my testing, I am not giving up much in image quality. I'm not giving up much in noise performance. And I am certainly not giving up the important feature that I use every day. What I am getting is higher resolution, excellent image quality, very low noise, strong autofocus, and AI subject recognition, longer battery life, and I save about $2,500. For me, that is a very easy decision. The Sony A1 II is an excellent camera. There's no question about that. But after putting both cameras through real-world testing, rather than simply look at the specification on paper. I have to say this, the A1 II may be the more expensive camera, but the A7R VI is the camera I would actually buy. And when a camera that costs $2,500 less can deliver essentially the same real-world image quality while giving me higher resolution and, in my testing, better bird-eye recognition, you have to ask yourself one simple question: why pay more? Thanks a lot for watching and see you in the next video.